do want to welcome you to this Greek reading group. It's lunchtime here in Wilmore, Central Kentucky. We're on Eastern Daylight Time, which is Greenwich +4. So if you want to join, we tend to meet at this time. I'll send out Facebook notices typically the day or two beforehand. And so I've got a color coding text up, and I wanted to just look briefly at some things here, just looking again at verses 1 through 4. The main sentence is found in verse 3, actually. It seemed also to me, and here what I'm doing is some semantic diagramming, and I think this is something I teach in my Koine Greek grammar. So to write seemed good to me, to write accurately. So in order to write things in order for you. So what I'm doing is, in this method of semantic diagramming and analysis, I work with zones, which you can see as the watermarked text here, and verse reference, initial conjunction, subject zone, verb zone, and complement zone. So I line things up into their zones, and then everything else is a modifier. So really the main subject here is to write. To write is the subject of the verb. Actually, I got it in the wrong zone here. So to write is actually the main verb. So it goes into this verb zone. Then you have, it seemed good to me. And you have a ke, which is added to the emu. It's a crasis, also to me. And then the to me is being further modified. So really, I consider to me, it seemed good to me. It could be in the complement zone. And if I were to schematize and re-envision this approach, I would probably include it as a complement. Right now, I include datives, and particularly datives of indirect objects. I'll put them underneath the verb, the verb as the indirect object. Now, me seemed good to me as being modified by having followed. And this is really a perfect tense verb form, which is usually yellow highlighted. When I copy and paste the Greek text into Word, this is a Word file, you don't, it doesn't come over all the highlighting. Now, this participle, as we saw last time, is qualified itself by two adverbs, having followed all things. Now, this is the direct object of having followed. And so at this point, I'm going to put it in the position of a complement after the verb. And here the verb is a participle, which is modifying emu. So notice that I'm layering different modifiers depending on what they modify. These two adverbs modify this participle, which is modifying the me. The me having followed from the beginning accurately all things being the direct object of following. And then the subject, then, as I had mentioned before, is to write to you in an orderly way. It seemed good to me. So this is technically the subject. Remember that infinitives, that's an aorist active infinitive, they are verbal nouns. And so they can function like a noun can function. And in this case, it's functioning as the subject of the verb. So this is the main sentence. And everything else is a modifier. So what I'm doing now is I'm really just aligning things under what they modify. And so here, vocatives are kind of interesting. Most excellent Theophilus, sometimes they don't have an explicit grammatical relation to the main sentence. In this case, it's I'm going to put it as modifying you to you, right to you, most excellent Theophilus. And most excellent is modifying Theophilus. So you notice that I align things 3 spaces in front of what they're modifying. And so you know what modifiers are by reference to whether they have 3 dashes in front of them. So I'm going to separate the ke and the mu because ke is, or kai is adding additive emphasis also, means also. It's not being used to connect 2 equal elements, but rather is functioning more adverbally, modifying the verb. So I have it there. Then here's the indirect object part of that, the mu, which is really originally mu. So yeah, this is the main sentence right here. Now all these other parts of these verses are all subordinate clauses. And the ina clause is modifying the main verb. To write seemed good to me in order that you would know, and we could do further layering and modifying within that, but I don't want to spend too much time. I just wanted to show you the benefit of this kind of approach. It really slows you down. You don't have to change word order. I'm just kind of spacing things over. Sometimes I'm hitting a hard return and aligning things, really just to show you that the main sentence is actually in verse 3. And this epidae pair is a subordinating conjunction. And then you have this being part of that initial subordinating conjunction. So you basically have a main sentence with 3 subordinate clauses that are started by conjunctions, and they're indicated by the green. And so it seemed good to me. That's the main sentence. To write to you seemed good to me. And then you have some modifiers there. And then at the end. Okay, so this is called semantic diagramming. And you usually want to, I would do more work aligning and identifying modifiers within these subordinate clauses, but that would take a lot of time. And once you isolate these elements by hard returning and aligning, it allows you space to make comments. And so students I'll have them, say this is the main verb. You can say perfective aspect. You can make some other observations about the verb. Here, the ke, you'll want to say something like ascensive, thematic addition. And so this is the emphatic pronoun. And it's functioning as the working with this verb dokeo. This is just the beginning, dokeo. We can maybe call it the indirect object, or this is just really just the idiom of dokeo when it takes the infinitive as its subject. Something seemed good to me, so it seemed good to me. Sometimes you have an infinitive, sometimes not. So yeah, this is part of the idiom with this verb, that it can occur like that. And then you can make other kinds of observations. This is really what's called the semantic analysis. So this approach is called semantic diagramming and then semantic analysis. It slows you down. It gets you thinking, what is the main conjunction, subject, verb, and complement. Everything else is a modifier, and you have to decide what modifies what and how does it modify it. And then the next higher level of consideration would be why. Why does it modify it in that way? Okay, so let's go back to our text here, and we're going to keep reading with verse 5. So, Eyeneto en tes imeres herodou basileus tes Iudeas, Ierus, tis onamati, Zacharias ex ephemerias avia, que gune avto ento thugateron, Aaron, que to onimo avtes Elizabeth. All right. So one thing that I noticed right away, and when you're navigating sentences, look for that initial conjunction. And here we don't have one, which is called a syndeton. A syndeton is a way to indicate that there's no connector that is appropriate. And so therefore we have to imply what the significance of the syndeton is. It can indicate break.
Is it in this case, is it indicating that it's like a continual flow? Or?
No, that's you wouldn't use a syndeton for continual flow unless there was like a rhetorical flourish, and then you start to have parallel ideas and you'd be kind of obvious you're in the middle of a flow. This is indicating a section break. It's a pretty clear break from a prologue, which is a self-reflective statement of, what am I doing? What are my sources? And one like, so the syndeton here really classically is just marking a break, a section break. Yeah, so the interesting thing about syndeton is it can mean close connection when there's like a little bit of a rhetorical flourish going on, a set of questions being asked, or a flourish. And usually you can tell when you're in the middle of that because the content is very similar. But here we don't have similar content, we just have a clean break. And so that's why we have a syndeton here. Yeah, sometimes a syndeton can indicate movement from general to particular.
Right.
It can, in Levinson, Stephen Levinson's work outlines some of these. I summarize these in my Koine Greek grammar in my chapter where I deal with polysyndeton and asyndeton. I think it's in chapter 15. I summarize his discussion and some of the discussions of the grammars. It's very significant. So look for those connectors. Connectors are very important, but also the lack of connector is significant. One quick example of a syndeton where it doesn't mean like a big break, but probably a move to general, from a general to particular, is found in 1 Timothy 10 and 11. Here, Paul is talking about women plural. Notice that the references to women are plural. And then in verse 11, there's a syndeton. There's no connector here, but he's still on the topic of women, but he switches to singular. And this is one of the things that a syndeton can indicate, or it implies, or it's found within these situations where you move from addressing women in general to now a woman in the singular. I have a major article on this where I argue that this is actually a reference to a wife in relation to her husband. So that this is an example where you have a syndeton that isn't a big section break, but it is kind of a minor break. And there's a move from general women in plural to a woman in particular in relation to an on-air. And whenever you have a gune in relation to on-air, and in the New Testament, arguably every case, it's a husband-wife relationship. Yeah, and that's an observation made by many, not just me. Yeah, so I'm getting it from others is what I'm saying. Yeah, okay, so it happened.
Was it 2 Timothy 2:10?
1 Timothy 2:10 and 11. Yeah. It happened in the days of Herod the king of Judea, is how I would begin translate. It happened. Now, this idea of it happened seems to be a Septuagintal idiom or a Hebrew idiom. And we're in a style here that matches Jewish historiography. As we'll see in chapters 1 and 2, there's a lot of Jewish history and religious traditions called upon, and the style is more paratactic. And paratactic means that sentences are put next to other sentences in kind of an equal kind of fashion. This happened and this happened, next this happened and this kind of thing. But Luke knows how to pour on a more attic or refined style, which is called hypotactic, where there's a lot of subordinating clauses. In fact, we just saw it. We saw this, verses 1 through 4 is a highly structured, complex sentence. And this is more reminiscent of good Greek syntax. But he's going to switch into more of a paratactic mode in what we see next.
What do we do?
And that has to do with the fact that he's recording kind of in a Jewish context. Now we could compare and contrast, for example, what he does in Acts 17, which is where Paul is in Areopagus. And there he's using optatives and a lot of subordinate clauses. So this is basically a sign of a good educated writer, that he's writing in the style to match the setting. And so this is what we see here. And he's introducing a narrative, from a Jewish perspective. Yeah, Emily?
So this might be really a pedantic question, and maybe I shouldn't know the answer, but we usually see tis within some sort of accent, which usually, for me, it helps remember what it is. Here there is no accent, which is why I was slightly confused.
Well, remember, there's two words that are formed with tis, one with accent and one without accent.
Right, but isn't the one without accent like someone, anyone, anything?
Yeah, and it throws its accent off. And so that's why hierus has an acute accent. It should be a grave.
Okay,
so what's happening is that this tis likes to throw its accent off to the previous word, and that causes it to have an acute accent when normally we would have a grave.
Right, so
like here, see, here's gune. That's what we'd normally expect. So this is how this word functions, and it's an indefinite pronoun.
Right, so the indefinite pronoun usually doesn't have an accent.
That's right. Yeah, it sometimes it could have one on, but never on the iota. And that's the difference, is the interrogative pronoun, which looks like tis, has an accent on the iota.
Right. Okay, maybe I'm just confused because I looked it up in there's an S. What is going on?
Yeah. Notice that it's putting the accent as a grave, which means that something unusual is happening here. Normally it throws it off.
And it's in BDAG, it's placed, the accent is placed as a grave because there's no other word to throw it to.
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
That makes more sense.
Yeah.
I was a little confused.
What?
Right.
Yeah.
I was a little confused for a second. I was like, wait, this is someone or anyone, but there's an accent in BDAG and saying this. Okay, thank you. Sorry.
Yeah. No, it's okay. It's an enclitic, so that means it throws it forward. So look at its forms. Tenos, teni, tena, have accents on the last syllable, but not on the iota.
But then you're saying it's throwing the accent to Ierus.
Well, it's going to throw it forward, but in these forms, it can take accents if it's followed by a word that throws it back onto it. And then it will never be over the iota of the T part of it. And the significance of that is because if you see a word like this, tis, tenas, teni, tena, and you see an accent over the iota in like a live sentence, you're looking at an interrogative pronoun.
Yeah.
So think of I accented interrogative, like think of an interrogative sentence as an intense kind of.
I always think of it as like if there's an accent on top of it, it's like the bottom of the question mark has to.
Sure. Yeah. So in your mind, there's different ways that you can conceptualize it. But the indefinite pronoun does not take the accent over the iota.
I would have seen that, but then when I looked.
Yeah, it was confusing in the entry. Yeah, I see that. So it happened, and this is from yenome. It's a middle formed verb. We can translate it. It happened. It became something like that. It came. So it happened in the days of Herod. Now Herod is given further explanation as the basileus tes Iudeos deas, king of the Jews. So this is an appositional statement. Apposition is when you abut a noun to another noun to further define it. And so if we were doing constituent marking, we put an equal sign right there. In the days of Herod, draw an arrow, who was the king of the Jews.
But Judea, right?
King of the Judea, I'm sorry, not king of Judea. There was a certain priest, some priest with the name Zacharias. This is nominative.
And so
there's an implied verb here.
implied verb
It just is. This is like a basic existential statement. There was.
Right.
certain
I'm
priest.
aware that it is that, but I was wondering if there was a specific something telling us in here that.
Well, there's just no verb.
Okay. I mean,
Yeah.
I would have said that it was like a verbless.
Yeah. So we're looking for a verb, and we don't see one, so we have to supply one. It'd be like the verb ain. There was, but it's implied. There was a certain priest with the name by name Zacharias. Zacharias by name, from the division of Abijah. And this is a priestly division. So and it's kind of interesting, this word is from emer. You might recognize imera, which means day. And this day by day, this has to do with their daily service in the temple. This is how they named them descriptively.
If I would have,
this tribe or this
that
division.
without a lexicon, I probably would have said from the days,
But
like ek, from
Yeah.
from out of the days of this
Yeah.
Abijah.
Yeah.
But division makes more sense.
Yeah. So someone's asking, could this be the main verb with ierus being and for one, it actually is the main verb. So this is the main verb, but it often follows that there's a content to what became. Yeah, so I guess it is possible that you could say, so a priest by the name of Zacharias came in the days of, we'll see that Luke uses this as like a transitional device, and the Ieneto, we'll see that, and then there'll be like there'll be a subordinate clause to it.
Is it just Luke who does that though? I mean, I feel like it's it's common in narrative.
In Septuagint narrative,
And even in
particular.
Mark.
Yeah, that maybe uses the same, but Luke uses it a little bit differently. But it's a way to get the narrative going.
Is it kind of like the Hebrew Vayehi?
No, because Vayehi is, well, a little bit like Vayehi, but there's no Vav here. There's not a Ke.
Well, the Vayehi is like they're just like, and it happened and it was.
Yeah. Yeah. And so in that sense, it is like that. Yeah.
Like,
so it happened that there was, and the reason I want to put a that there is we'll see that Luke will use infinitives here as a way that he'll sometimes work with the Ieneto, that something happened, that something was occurred. Now, so what occurred is that there was a priest by the name of Zacharias from the tribe of Abijah, and the wife to him was from the daughters of Aaron, and then her name was Elizabeth. Her name, and the name of her was Elizabeth. So what we're seeing is that there's a lot of implied forms of imi, to be. So in a sense, you're right. All of this is like the subject of Ieneto, but each of these is like its own existential statement of this. This is a way to set the stage of the scenes. There was a certain priest. Now, in terms of information structure, it's interesting that and if you read through Levinson's discourse grammar, in terms of the use of the article, you introduce characters by lack of articles. And then after they're introduced, you use articles. So notice that the priest is indefinite, so there's no article. There was a certain priest, Zacharias, and then the wife to him, which would be a dative of possession. His wife was from the tribe of Aaron, the daughters of Aaron. And then now you have the daughters of Aaron. And then you have ta'onama. Now ta'onama has an article. And this illustrates another principle of the article is she's already been introduced and she's a known entity, and people who are known have names. So because the name is entailed in her being present already, you can refer to her name definitely, the name of her.
Just make this please,
Elizabeth.
Make sure I'm not having amnesia or something. We use the article. We don't use the article
to introduce
when we're first introducing someone, which seems counterintuitive.
It does.
Which is why I always forget. And then we use the article when someone is already introduced. Or
some entity is already known by implication.
Right. So it's like Aaron, and then we're like, and then as we, I don't know why I said Aaron.
In this case, it's anaphatic, right?
Yeah. Anarthrous or arthrous?
Well, so anarthrous use, so lack of article, indicates emphasis. You could say introductory emphasis to introduce them as emphasis, but thereafter you should expect there to be an article unless they're doing something significant or being reintroduced into the narrative.
What I'm saying is that when the article is used, it's
anaphoric.
Anaphoric is
that's what you mean. Yeah, anaphoric, exactly.
It's pointing back to
so there's a use of the article called anaphoric use, which means that it's referring back to something. And that's the typical, those are the article rules. You introduce somebody without the article. When you refer to that person subsequently, you have the article with them. The person, the one that we already talked about, unless they're doing something significant, and then you take the article away. That's how you can indicate emphasis of what they're saying or doing. Or sometimes if someone was introduced and then they're in the story for a little while, but they're not a major player in the story and they kind of are removed from the story, if you need to reintroduce them back in a couple chapters later, you might introduce them back in without the article again. So those are the rules.
So for just not emphasizing, understanding better, I know I should know this, but here we are. When we don't have the article that's like introduction, so kind of like in English, Luke came and I don't know what I'm saying, Luke, Elizabeth came and did this, whatever, right?
Yeah.
And then when we have the article, it's like saying the Elizabeth, it's like the one we just talked about.
Yeah, I can tell you a story. Like I went to a bar. The bartender there offered me something. Well, I introduced the bar, and whenever you have a scene, you have things that are there that are knowable, and so you can refer back, you can refer to those entities with a the. So we use this in English storytelling as well a little bit. Okay, so notice that when we see Elizabeth next mentioned, she has the article. Yeah, because she's been introduced. Okay, so verse 6, esande dikeu amphoteriu enantion tu theou parevum menu in passes tes entules que dikeo o masin tu kuriu amemftoi. The Omicron iota is two sound and kep. Okay, so de, always go to the conjunction
now.
now. This is progressing the idea. There's a new step in the unfolding narrative. De marks a new development. That's what it's marking. Wrongly, people will think of it as an adversative, but it doesn't primarily mark contrast or adversative sense. It really just marks new development. Now, it can be used in context of contrast when there's a new step being added and the elements are contrasted, but de is not inherently an adversative conjunction. It marks new development. So here the story is progressing. They were both dikeu, righteous, and antion to theu, before God, prepositional phrase. Then we have a post-nuclear circumstantial participle.
So is this a substantival adjective here because it's the subject? Well, it's a
predicate adjective.
Predicate, but it's agreeing with the subject.
Yeah, because it's working with the verb of equating, and when you're equating things, they're going to both be nominatives.
Because
So
if we said if I translate it as both of them were righteous.
That's correct. Yeah,
Right,
both
but
were righteous.
Just sorry, though I thought about it like that the first time, so I was like, oh well, then that both of them is the subject, but that's not. It's predicative, right?
Yeah.
Or is it true?
No, this is a predicate adjective, and this amphoteroi is amphoteros
Because it's working with
is
the
an
verb.
adjective as well. That would almost be like a substantive adjective. Substantive adjective both, then, and righteous is the predicate adjective.
Because it's working with the verb of being.
Yeah. And then someone asked a really good question. I was looking at this as I was preparing, just reading through that this morning, that enuntion is peculiar. You have different words that can mean before. And what does this one profile? And I think it may suggest a bit of more of an official, like as in before a court, like in the sight of God, they were righteous. And this is going to be important because Elizabeth, in fact, is going to be found to be barren. And in the ancient world, this indicated, people interpreted that as indicating God's curse on them. In fact, that's not what's going on. We know that. So both were righteous before God. So this may suggest like a court kind of setting.
It would be interesting to see if in anywhere in the Old Testament where we have people being called righteous before the Lord, if they use the word lifnei. Because if lifnei is used in the Hebrew Bible, then because lifnei with lifnei Adonai is usually it's communicating like in the presence of, like in the sight of God.
But in a judicial sense, this may suggest like a judicial kind of sense.
Right. So then I guess that's my question. Where do we see in this case, because you're saying it might mean like in the sight of God, or like not just like before God. It would be interesting to see how lifnei, like the ones the righteous, so that like the righteous ones said lifnei Adonai. If we have that anywhere in the Hebrew Bible, and if it's communicating, if it's used in like the sense of judgment, because then I think that might be a way to even better understand what is going on.
Yeah, I think to your point, in other words, Emily's asking about doing some work with, I think, Septuagint. You want to go to how are the Septuagint authors translating, enopion versus an antion.
Right. So
right.
then,
What words are they translating lifnei, which means
Yeah, so then-
before,
so-
and are they discerning different nuances based on the context?
yeah, so looking at
Mhm.
where we have it in Hebrew, and then
Yep.
is it, when it's translated into Septuagint, is it done in this way of Dikai and Fetheroi and
Yeah.
beyond?
Yeah. So in Antios, this is the LSJ intermediate. It means opposite of, like over against. So it does suggest more of a cold kind of, you against me, possibly hostile. It can be used in that sense. So here it's almost like, in a judicial sense, God is looking at them. So yeah.
It seems that Luke may also be introducing, he seems to have a emphasis on introducing the character or reputation of his characters. Like he's going to introduce Simeon, he's going to introduce Anna, and it seems like he wants to show that what God is getting ready to do, that everything is on the up and up. It's happening with reputable people. This is not just off in the corner with folks that are shady or not reliable,
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, he's underscoring the uprightness of the people. And this is kind of interesting because in later second century critique of Christians were that they were a bunch of charlatans, and converts were coming from the lower classes, and they need to believe in such fairy tales as this, and this new religion attracts like the worst of people and that kind of thing. So I do think that Luke, if we look at Luke Acts as a whole, that Luke does want to show that this early Christian movement is legitimate and is not that way, is not made up of charlatans and whatnot, that actually upholds justice and right, good standards. And these are good people. Like this is the context of God's revelation. Yeah, maybe I'll share at some point when we get towards the end, in the middle of these next two chapters, notes where I collected all the references to prodigious experiences and dreams and Old Testament traditions. And certainly the character of these people fits within that, because as we're going to see here, how they are both righteous before God is explained by this participle, parev omni, which is I consider that a post-nuclear verb. So after the main verb, circumstantial participle, this is explaining in what way or why they are righteous before God legally, because they are walking in all the commands and just requirements of the Lord. And then it ends with blameless. Blameless. Now you can see that this is not an adverb, but in the NASB, they translate it as an adverb, blamelessly. And so this is interesting use of the nominative as like almost a final appositional affirmation using this adjective. It means literally without fault. So it's from the verb memphome, to blame, and it has an alpha privative on the front, which negates that. And then it's the tos is a type of ending you can do with adjectives that are formed from verbs that indicates a past passive sense. So agapetos means beloved, and this one means blameless. Kind of, it's hard to translate that like that. So blameless, essentially. Yeah, blameless. Yeah, so these are upright people walking in all the commands and righteous requirements of the Lord. Now, does this mean that they were sinless, or does it mean that they recognized their poverty and did all that they needed to do in terms of sacrifices and stuff? I think that's what it means, is that they basically followed the Lord's direction to deal with themselves and were walking in the proper way that the law required, in the totality of who they were, including their sinfulness, that they did sacrifices and participated in the cult. So they were blameless and upright. And then we have verse 7, ke, and this ke connects with verse 6. So it's not a new development. There's continuity here. And so this idea of them being blameless and walking in all the commandments is conjoined with, and they had no children. So these two ideas can go together. In the ancient world, no, they're separate things. If you can't have not children and then be blameless. But Luke wants to say these go together. So here, a question. Someone's asking structurally whether the blameless could be seen as like an inclusio. Possibly with dikeo. It certainly is like a final capstone kind of idea. It's not like a summative kind of final, it's like the final word in the matter. Yeah. So I like that. Yeah. So, and they were keuk ein aftius teknon, and there was no child to them. They had no child. And for them, there was no child. So Luke is really showing some interesting uses of the dative. So you have a dative of possession, his wife, the wife to him. And in my Koine Greek grammar, I try to tease out that the difference between that and the genitive of possession. And I think the dative of possession indicates more personal interest, which is in keeping with the dative case. It's a case of personal interest. So it's a little bit more of a closer connection. And here I think the dative also conveys that sense that in respect to them, with regard to them, maybe it's a dative of reference, there was no child. But it makes it a little bit more localized in them by using this dative, which is in keeping with the dative case. So that for them, there was no child. And then you have kathoti ein a Elizabeth stira. Kathoti, whenever I see that, I get really excited because it's not simply OT, it's not an epi. There's other words for because. This one's a bit ramped up. It's a combination of kata, I think, and OT.
It's very Lucan, apparently, and only.
It's more marked, and kata indicates like standard, so it's like a combination of kathos and OT. Kathos is according as or just as, and then you by adding OT. Yeah, I think it adds a bit of a punch because in fact. I think maybe is how I would translate it, because in fact.
Yeah.
OT, remember, marks off content. So in fact would be kind of setting that off, and then the kathos combined with it. I think that's how I would translate it, because in fact, Elizabeth was barren.
Yeah. What's it? Oh, you probably have it.
Mm-hmm.
If like if you scroll down, it says in because, comma, in view of the fact. In BDEC.
Oh, in BDEC. Okay.
The next one is it has the entry of,
Mm-hmm.
and it's only found in scripture and living material.
Yeah, interesting. So this is probably, if we looked at use of kathoti, I bet this is a word that might suggest us a register of language, the kind of higher literary style that Luke is engaged in, I'm guessing. It'd help establish that. So it's found in Herodotus, Thucydides, inscriptions, papyri, Septuagint. So why is he writing this way? Is he imitating Septuagintal style? Is he also showing some nice literary style in doing this? And then we have another ke. So here we're having just another add-on to the storyline, and both were. Now here I think this participle probebekotes, it's a perfect active from probeno. Yeah, to go in front of, to advanced, to be advanced. This is a periphrastic participle going with ason. Now it is fronted, way fronted. Usually periphrastics, if you look at the majority of them, you're going to have a form of imi, sometimes yenome, sometimes arco, very rare, but you're gonna have that, then the participle. So when you put the participle way in front, it's for some effect. And here the effect would be to abut it. I think you have some abutted emphasis. Greek has some flexibility in word order, and if you want to associate things together, you can abut them grammatically. And I think it has to do with maybe the visual picture that is being conveyed. And so both advanced in their days were. And that's the picture. He wants us to say they're old. They're old. She's barren and they're old. And this is all setting up the miracle that's going to take place, and that is that she's going to get pregnant.
Perfect participle?
Yeah, it's perfect. Perfect active participle, masculine nominative plural.
Question.
Mm-hmm.
The repetition in Otero.
Mm-hmm.
So it was both righteous. Now
Both
in
aged.
verse 6, both righteous before both advanced.
Mm-hmm.
And does that have significance that he is repeating that? Is that to be seen together in some way? Or?
Yeah, and I think I think so. Both. I'm reading through Genesis with my wife Christina, and we were just reading about Abraham after Sarah dies. He gets married again, and they have like 6 more children. We're like, whoa, he's like 100, but who knows how old that his new wife was.
So Anabino is
So yeah, you can have marriages, older men with younger women, and so you should keep bearing children. So he's saying they're both old. Yeah.
Anabino is to go up, but probino is like to go to.
I'm not sure if you understand my question.
Okay.
What I'm saying is, in verse 6,
They're both
righteous.
Yeah.
Then down here, both advancing years. I'm saying, is Luke trying to show? Is he trying to get us to see that as parallel ideas, or are those connected with the repetition of the both, or no? It's just, just happens to be that way, or?
Well, he's wanting, I think in the mental conception, he's wanting us to think of them as a pair. So the both helps to, it's a concise way of referring to them both without keep mentioning them. But I mean, he could have used they, right? He could have used av tu. And so by using amphoteru, he's saying they're in this together. Let's view them together. So yeah, I mean, I think that's a good question. Why does he want us to keep viewing them as together, as both? Yeah, I think that's a good, fair question. Yeah. So I think we have time for another verse. So, and it happened. Now here we have an advancement of the story. Next step, de. So de indicates a new step. So in his service, ento ira tevin afton, in his serving, inte taxi, in the order tes ephemerias avtu, in his division before the Lord. And here's the enanti. So here we're having a little bit of confirmation that enanti is here. This is in before the Lord in terms of sacrificial priesthood activity. So, and it happened in all of this, in his serving, while he was serving in the order of his division before the Lord, according to the custom of his service, he was chosen in order to sacrifice. So according to the custom of his service, according to the custom of the priesthood, I should say, according to the custom of the priesthood, he was chosen by lot. Okay, so what's happening here, this verb lankano means to choose by lot. So this is a big setup here that Luke is introducing this, and this is where I would relate that what happened is in fact that he was chosen. So what happened above here, what happened is that there was a priest by this name who had a wife, her name was Elizabeth. So all of this is the content of what happened. The content of what happened in this verse 8 and 9, is that he was chosen. That's the content of what happened. It happened. And so it's interesting. Sometimes you have the content of what happened. We'll see that it's an infinitive. Sometimes we'll see that there's an OT, I think. And in these cases, what happened is indicated by an implied emi up here, implied form of the verb emi. There was, introducing these characters. And in this case, the content is actually a verbal, finite verbal idea. He was chosen by lot. And this is how they did it. According to the custom of the priesthood, this is Luke's way of explaining this is how they did it. They chose, and so in their division, it was their turn, their division to serve, and they cast the lot, and it fell to Zechariah. And the lot fell to him, and then the purpose of that is indicated by the articular infinitive, to sacrifice.
So how do we do with that article?
Or to burn the incense. Well, the article, I think, is marking this as like a purpose idea. So he was chosen by lot in order to sacrifice, or that he would sacrifice. And then the participle that follows is following the verb. This is the nuclear verb, not the main verb. The main verb is here, elakin. Then you have the articular infinitive indicating purpose.
So
And then you
articular
have,
infinitives, do they always indicate purpose?
often they do. They sometimes they can be result. So those are the two options.
Is purpose a result
Mhm. And in my Koine Greek grammar, I lay out the statistics for that,
for articular infinitives?
for articular infinitives. Yeah. Based on a dissertation from the University of Chicago about 100 years ago.
I just apparently forgot.
No.
Articular infinitives.
So you can look at my chapter on infinitives and you can look into that. So my point here is that the is elthon is a masculine nominative participle from is erkome. It is postposition to its verb. So it follows its nuclear verb. Nuclear means the main verb of its clause. And when a participle, circumstantial participle follows, it is post-nuclear, there's three main functions it can have. Redundant, which this one is not, having the same meaning or nearly the same meaning, it doesn't. And so the other options would be explanatory. And then a new one that I've just come up with, that when I revise Koine Greek grammar, I'll add this, is segue or transitional. It's not that either. So this is really explaining the nature of offering the incense, to burn the incense, namely by entering into the sanctuary of the Lord. And that's what he was chosen by lot to do, to burn incense by way of entering into the sanctuary of the Lord. All right. So I don't know if there's any, I think the grammar is fairly straightforward, except for, we just are looking at these ayenato. This is a way that Luke says, and it happened, and what happened. The content of what is happening is then found after that setup. So really we have, while this is a special use of the infinitive here, this is an articular infinitive working with the preposition. In means while, but we could use pro. The preposition pro could be found before. Meta can be used for after. Those are all temporal uses of the articular infinitive. So en, pros, pro, or meta. Then we can use is or pros. Those are for purpose statements. And then we can use dia with the genitive to mean because. So those are the different uses of the preposition with the article with the infinitive. It's a type of construction that occurs enough that we can recognize it as a construction. They're pretty old constructions in the language use. They're a little bit marked. They show a nice style. But we have to think of it in terms of efficiency as well. Like he could have used maybe a conjunctive subordinate clauses. He could have used maybe a participle, while, with implied while serving as priest. But Luke uses this infinitive construction, which takes the accusative noun or pronoun as the subject of the infinitive. That's the construction. So it's preposition, article, always in that order. Then you have some flexibility, infinitive and accusative case, subject. And then sometimes you might have accusative case object, and usually the object is going to be furthest away. So sometimes we have to what's the subject? What's the object? So yeah, basically then we're just getting prepositional phrases with genitive modifiers, another prepositional phrase with genitive modifiers, and then we get to the main verb, lock-in with the infinitive construction. Now, verse 10.
Can I ask a question about
Sure.
this one?
Oh, yeah, I guess we need to end here because our time's up. Yep.
But can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So we have kai panto pleito, and the whole of the multitude was, and then we have tu lau, right?
Mhm.
Of the people.
Mhm.
So it seems like on kai panto pleitos and the whole of the multitude
Mhm.
is almost left dislocated, because I mean, from the framework of VSO, which whatever, we all agree or disagree, it's scholarship, nobody can agree on anything. So the verb is not first, but I guess I'm trying to think of, because when I go to translate it and make it make sense in English, it's like the whole of the multitude of the people were praying outside
At the hour of.
at the hour of the incense burning,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So we know that the subject is the whole of the multitude of the people,
Mhm.
right? But the verb breaks that up. So
Yep.
is the kai panto plethos, is that left dislocated? And if I had my laptop, I would see what Rungi says in his discourse filter. But I would maybe say that's like topically left dislocated or fronted or something.
I wouldn't call it left dislocated.
Oh, he calls it topical.
He
frame.
calls it
Okay.
a topical frame. So it's placed out of order. So I just turned this filter on and off. So I guess we are looking at verse 10. So verse 10 starts with a ke, which combines it to that. It's got a left topical frame.
Okay, so it was a left topical frame.
Yeah, this is out of order. We wouldn't, usually you'd want a verb to come first, but he's stressing, there's some stress here by it, because usually in sentences, you start with older information and then you introduce newer. Well, this is new information it's put on at the front. It's also stressed with the pan, all the multitude. And then it's also has a little bit of stress because it's got a discontinuous modifier. To o is on the other side of the verb. This is called a discontinuous constituent. It really is modifying all the multitude of the people. So by separating it, you're creating some extra attention paid to it. And then you also have a periphrastic participle construction, was praying. And then you have outside modifying praying, where they were praying. This is present tense imperfective aspect. They were doing this repeatedly. And then you have a dative of time, at the hour of the burnt sacrifice. So all the people was praying outside. Yeah, all the multitude of the people were praying.
And
Yeah.
already emphatic because he's using pan
Yeah.
and plethos.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, the multitude of the people, the pan. So there's something special going on here. This is, as we're going to see, that Zacharias is going to meet with an angel. All the people is praying. It's an expectant time. And I'm wondering if we're to imply that people knew him and Elizabeth, if they were praying for him, or if they're praying for the nation, or if they thought this is just kind of interesting, he doesn't have any children. If Luke is wanting us to imply, what's the content of their praying? Well, yeah, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week. Take care.